The retirement hall was packed with colleagues, friends, and family, all gathered to celebrate Robert's decades of hard work. The air was filled with laughter and applause as Robert stood at the podium, his wife Nora and their two grown children, Emily and Jack, seated proudly in the front row. Robert's speech was heartfelt, thanking Nora for her unwavering support and his children for their love. The room erupted in cheers as he finished, and Nora wiped a tear from her eye, smiling at the man she had spent over 30 years building a life with. But just as the applause began to die down, a woman's voice cut through the noise. "Robert," she called out, her tone sharp and demanding. All eyes turned to the back of the room, where a woman in her late 30s stood, holding the hand of a young boy. The room fell silent as she walked forward, her heels clicking against the floor. "You can't just stand there and pretend we don't exist," she said, her voice trembling with anger. Nora's smile faded, and Robert's face turned pale. The woman introduced herself as Claire and revealed that the boy, no older than 10, was Robert's son. The room buzzed with whispers, and Nora felt the ground beneath her shift. She looked at Robert, waiting for him to deny it, but he just stood there, frozen. Nora's mind raced as she tried to process what was happening. Claire's words echoed in her ears. "You promised you'd leave her after retirement. You promised you'd be with us." Nora's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of her seat. Emily and Jack exchanged horrified glances, unsure of what to do. Robert finally stepped down from the podium, his face ashen, and tried to usher Claire out of the room, but she refused to leave. "No, Robert," she said firmly. "You've been lying to everyone for years. It's time they knew the truth." Nora stood up, her voice shaking but steady. "What is she talking about, Robert?" she demanded. Robert couldn't meet her eyes. "Nora, I can explain," he stammered, but Claire interrupted. "Explain what? How you've been living a double life? How you've been lying to your family while playing house with me and our son?" The room was in chaos now, with people murmuring and phones recording the scene. Nora felt a wave of nausea as the reality sank in. She turned to her children, who looked just as lost as she felt. And without another word, she walked out of the room, her heart pounding. The days that followed were a blur. Nora moved through the house like a ghost, replaying every moment of her marriage, searching for signs she might have missed. Robert tried to talk to her, but she couldn't bear to look at him. Emily and Jack were furious, demanding answers from their father, but Robert had none to give. Claire, meanwhile, began reaching out to Nora, sending messages and even showing up at the house. She claimed she didn't want to hurt Nora, but felt she had no choice after Robert continued to delay leaving his family. Nora finally agreed to meet her, and the two women sat across from each other in a quiet cafe. Claire's story was heartbreaking. She had met Robert at work years ago, and he had painted a picture of a loveless marriage, promising to leave Nora once he retired. Claire had believed him, building a life around their relationship and raising their son with the hope that Robert would one day be fully present. But as the years passed, Robert's promises remained unfulfilled, and Claire grew desperate. Nora listened in silence, her heart breaking not just for herself but for Claire and the boy who had been caught in the middle of Robert's lies. Robert, meanwhile, was falling apart. The scandal had spread like wildfire, and his reputation was in ruins. Colleagues who had once respected him now avoided him, and the media had picked up the story, turning his private life into public gossip. He tried to apologize to Nora, to explain that he had never meant to hurt her, but his words felt hollow. "You didn't mean to hurt me?" Nora asked, her voice cold. "You lied to me for years, Robert. You lied to our children. You built a whole other life with someone else. How could you not mean to hurt me?" Robert had no answer. He sat in silence, his head in his hands as Nora packed her bags and moved into a hotel. Emily and Jack struggled to process their father's betrayal, torn between their love for him and their anger at what he had done. Jack refused to speak to him, while Emily tried to mediate, urging her mother to at least hear Robert out. But Nora was done listening. She filed for divorce, determined to rebuild her life on her own terms. As the legal proceedings began, more secrets came to light. Robert's financial records revealed that he had been supporting Claire and their son for years, draining savings that Nora had believed were for their retirement. The betrayal cut deeper than Nora had imagined, but it also gave her clarity. She focused on herself, reconnecting with old friends and rediscovering hobbies she had set aside during her marriage. Emily and Jack, though still angry, began to support their mother, finding strength in her resilience. Robert, on the other hand, was consumed by guilt. He tried to make amends with Claire, but she had moved on. Realizing that she deserved better than a man who had lied to everyone he claimed to love, she focused on raising her son, determined to give him a stable and honest life. The final blow came when Robert's company asked him to step down from his advisory role, citing the scandal as a distraction. He was left with nothing: no job, no family, and no respect. Nora, meanwhile, found a new sense of purpose. She started a small business, something she had always dreamed of but never pursued, and slowly began to heal. The divorce was finalized, and though the pain of Robert's betrayal would always linger, Nora refused to let it define her. She stood on the porch of her new home one evening, watching the sunset, and felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. Robert's lies had shattered her world, but in picking up the pieces, Nora had found a strength she never knew she had. And as she looked out at the horizon, she knew that her story was far from over. It was just beginning. Nora's new life began to take shape, but the echoes of the past still lingered. She threw herself into her business, a cozy bookstore that quickly became a favorite spot in the neighborhood. The shelves were filled with stories of resilience, love, and new beginnings, themes that resonated deeply with her. Customers often commented on the warm atmosphere, unaware of the storm Nora had weathered to get there. Emily and Jack visited often, helping out when they could, and Nora found comfort in their presence. They were her anchors, reminding her that even in the darkest times, family could be a source of light. But Robert's absence was a constant shadow. He tried to reach out several times, sending letters and emails, but Nora ignored them. She wasn't ready to forgive, and she wasn't sure she ever would be. One afternoon, as Nora was arranging a display of new arrivals, the bell above the door chimed. She looked up to see Claire standing hesitantly in the doorway, her son clutching her hand. Nora's heart skipped a beat, but she forced a polite smile. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice steady. Claire stepped inside, her eyes scanning the cozy space. "This is lovely," she said softly. "I heard about your bookstore and wanted to see it for myself." Nora nodded, unsure of what to say. Claire took a deep breath. "I also wanted to apologize," she continued, "for everything. I never meant to hurt you, Nora. I was just lost." Nora studied her for a moment, seeing the pain and regret in Claire's eyes. "We were both hurt by the same man," Nora said finally. "But that doesn't mean we have to be enemies." Claire's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. The two women stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. Then Claire's son tugged on her hand, eager to explore the children's section, and the moment passed. Nora watched them go, feeling a strange sense of closure. Robert, meanwhile, was struggling to find his footing. He had moved to a small apartment on the outskirts of town, far from the life he had once known. The guilt of his actions weighed heavily on him, and he spent his days reflecting on the choices that had led him here. He tried to reconnect with Emily and Jack, but the wounds were still fresh. Jack refused to see him, but Emily agreed to meet for coffee one afternoon. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Dad," she said bluntly, "but I want to understand. Why did you do it?" Robert sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "I don't have a good answer, Emily," he admitted. "I was selfish. I thought I could have it all, but I ended up losing everything that mattered." Emily nodded, her expression softening slightly. "Mom's doing better," she said after a pause. "She's strong, stronger than I think even she realized." Robert smiled faintly. "She always was," he said. The conversation was strained, but it was a start. As the months passed, Nora's bookstore became a symbol of her resilience. She hosted book clubs, author signings, and community events, creating a space where people could come together and share their stories. One evening, as she was closing up, she noticed a familiar figure standing outside the window. It was Robert. Her heart raced, but she took a deep breath and opened the door. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. Robert looked older, his face lined with regret. "I just wanted to see you," he said quietly, "to tell you how sorry I am for everything." Nora crossed her arms, studying him. "Sorry doesn't change what you did," she said. "I know," Robert replied. "And I don't expect you to forgive me. I needed you to know that I regret it. Every single day." Nora nodded, her expression unreadable. "Thank you for saying that," she said finally. "But I've moved on, Robert. I hope you can too." With that, she closed the door and turned off the lights, leaving him standing in the dim glow of the street lamp. The final chapter of Nora's story was one of quiet triumph. She had faced betrayal, heartbreak, and loss, but she had emerged stronger and more determined than ever. Her bookstore thrived, becoming a beloved part of the community, and her relationship with her children grew even deeper. Emily and Jack admired their mother's strength, and though they still struggled with their feelings about Robert, they found solace in the fact that Nora was happy. Claire and her son became regulars at the bookstore, and over time, Nora and Claire developed a tentative friendship, bound by their shared history and their determination to move forward. Robert, meanwhile, continued to live with the consequences of his actions, but he found a measure of peace in knowing that Nora had found her own path. As Nora stood in her bookstore one evening, surrounded by the stories of others, she realized that her own story was far from over. It was a story of resilience, of new beginnings, and of the strength it takes to rebuild a life from the ashes. And as she looked out at the bustling street, she knew that whatever came next, she was ready. Nora's life settled into a rhythm, but the past had a way of resurfacing when she least expected it. One rainy afternoon, as she was organizing a stack of books, the bell above the door chimed. She looked up to see a man in his late 50s, his face weathered but kind. He introduced himself as Daniel, a local historian who had heard about her bookstore and wanted to collaborate on a community event. Nora welcomed the idea, eager to bring more people into her space. Over the next few weeks, they worked closely together, planning a series of talks about the town's history. Daniel was easy to talk to, and Nora found herself enjoying his company more than she had expected. He had a way of making her laugh, something she hadn't done in a long time. Emily and Jack noticed the change in their mother and teased her gently about her new friend. But Nora brushed it off. She wasn't ready to think about romance, not after everything she had been through. Still, Daniel's presence brought a lightness to her days that she hadn't realized she was missing. Meanwhile, Robert continued to struggle with his isolation. He had started attending therapy, hoping to understand why he had made the choices he did. It was a slow process, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was making progress. He wrote letters to Nora, not expecting a response, but needing to express his thoughts. In one letter, he admitted that he had taken her for granted, that he had been blind to the love and stability she had provided. "You were my anchor, Nora," he wrote, "and I let go of you without realizing how lost I would be without you." Nora read the letters, but didn't reply. She wasn't ready to reopen that chapter of her life, but she couldn't deny that his words stirred something in her. She tucked the letters away in a drawer, unsure of what to do with them. Claire, too, was finding her way. She had started a small online business, selling handmade crafts, and was slowly building a life for herself and her son. She and Nora had developed a tentative friendship, bound by their shared history and their determination to move forward. One evening, Claire stopped by the bookstore with her son, who was now a regular in the children's section. "I just wanted to thank you," Claire said, as they sat in the cafe area, "for not hating me. I know I don't deserve your kindness, but it means a lot." Nora smiled faintly. "We've both been through enough," she said. "Holding on to anger would only hurt us more." Claire nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "I'm trying to do better," she said. "For him," she added, glancing at her son. "I want him to grow up knowing that it's never too late to make things right." Nora reached across the table and squeezed Claire's hand. "You're doing a good job," she said softly, "and that's all any of us can do." As the community event approached, Nora found herself looking forward to it more than she had expected. Daniel had become a constant presence in her life, and she realized how much she had missed having someone to share her thoughts with. The night of the event, the bookstore was packed with people, and Nora felt a surge of pride as she looked around. Daniel gave a heartfelt speech about the importance of preserving history, and Nora couldn't help but notice how his eyes lingered on her as he spoke. After the event, as they were cleaning up, Daniel turned to her. "You've built something really special here," he said. "I'm glad I got to be a part of it." Nora smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." They stood there for a moment, the air between them charged with unspoken words, before Daniel finally said goodnight. The next morning, Nora woke up feeling lighter than she had in years. She had faced so much pain and betrayal, but she had also found strength she never knew she had. Her bookstore was thriving, her children were happy, and she had even begun to let go of the anger she had carried for so long. As she stood in the bookstore, surrounded by the stories of others, she realized that her own story was far from over. It was a story of resilience, of new beginnings, and of the strength it takes to rebuild a life from the ashes. And as she looked out at the bustling street, she knew that whatever came next, she was ready. The past had shaped her, but it didn't define her. She was Nora, and her story was just beginning. Nora's days began to take on a new rhythm, one filled with small but meaningful moments. The bookstore continued to thrive, becoming a hub for the community. People came not just to buy books, but to connect, to share stories, and to find a sense of belonging. Nora loved seeing the space come alive with conversation and laughter, a stark contrast to the quiet loneliness she had felt in the early days after Robert's betrayal. Daniel became a regular presence, often stopping by to discuss new ideas for events or simply to chat over coffee. Their friendship deepened, and Nora found herself looking forward to his visits more and more. There was a comfort in his company, a sense of ease she hadn't felt in years. Emily and Jack noticed the change in their mother and teased her gently, but Nora brushed it off. She wasn't ready to put a label on what was happening between her and Daniel, but she couldn't deny that he brought a sense of joy to her life. Robert, meanwhile, was still grappling with the consequences of his actions. He had started volunteering at a local shelter, hoping to find some sense of purpose. The work was humbling, and it forced him to confront the privilege he had taken for granted. He continued to write letters to Nora, though he had stopped expecting a response. In one letter, he shared how much he missed the simple moments they had shared. The quiet mornings over coffee, the laughter at family dinners, the way she had always known how to calm him when he was stressed. "I didn't realize how much I needed you until I lost you," he wrote. "And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope you're happy, Nora. You deserve to be." Nora read the letter with a heavy heart, tucking it away with the others. She wasn't ready to respond, but she couldn't deny that his words stirred something in her. Forgiveness felt like a distant possibility, but she no longer felt the sharp sting of anger when she thought of him. Claire, too, was finding her footing. Her online business was growing, and she had started to build a network of friends and supporters. She and Nora had developed a tentative friendship, bound by their shared history and their determination to move forward. One afternoon, Claire stopped by the bookstore with her son, who had become a regular in the children's section. "I wanted to ask you something," Claire said hesitantly as they sat in the cafe area. "I've been thinking about starting a small crafting workshop here in town, something for moms and kids to do together. Do you think the bookstore could host it?" Nora considered the idea, surprised by how much she liked it. "I think that's a wonderful idea," she said. "Let's make it happen." Claire's face lit up with gratitude, and Nora felt a sense of satisfaction. It wasn't just about helping Claire. It was about creating something positive out of the mess they had both been through. As the weeks passed, Nora found herself feeling more at peace than she had in years. The pain of Robert's betrayal was still there, but it no longer defined her. She had built a new life, one filled with purpose and connection. One evening, as she was closing up the bookstore, Daniel stopped by. "I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner with me sometime," he said, his tone casual but his eyes earnest. Nora hesitated, her heart racing. She hadn't been on a date in decades, and the idea felt both exciting and terrifying. But as she looked at Daniel, she realized how much she had come to trust him. "I'd like that," she said finally, a smile tugging at her lips. Daniel's face broke into a grin, and Nora felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was a small step, but it felt like the beginning of something new. The next morning, Nora woke up feeling a sense of anticipation she hadn't felt in years. She had faced so much pain and betrayal, but she had also found strength she never knew she had. Her bookstore was thriving, her children were happy, and she had even begun to let go of the anger she had carried for so long. As she stood in the bookstore, surrounded by the stories of others, she realized that her own story was far from over. It was a story of resilience, of new beginnings, and of the strength it takes to rebuild a life from the ashes. And as she looked out at the bustling street, she knew that whatever came next, she was ready. The past had shaped her, but it didn't define her. She was Nora, and her story was just beginning. Nora's dinner with Daniel was a quiet affair, but it felt significant. They went to a small Italian restaurant tucked away on a side street, the kind of place with checkered tablecloths and candles and wine bottles. The conversation flowed easily, as it always did with Daniel. They talked about books, their favorite authors, and the history of the town. But there were also moments of quiet, where they simply enjoyed each other's company. Nora found herself relaxing, letting go of the tension she hadn't even realized she was carrying. When Daniel walked her to her car afterward, he hesitated before saying goodnight. "I had a really nice time," he said, his voice soft. "Me too," Nora replied, smiling up at him. For a moment, it seemed like he might kiss her, but instead, he squeezed her hand and stepped back. "Good night, Nora," he said. "Good night, Daniel," she replied, feeling a mix of relief and disappointment as she drove home. Over the next few weeks, Nora and Daniel continued to spend time together, their connection growing stronger. They went for walks in the park, attended local events, and even collaborated on a new series of history talks at the bookstore. Emily and Jack were thrilled to see their mother happy, though they teased her mercilessly about her gentleman friend. Nora laughed it off, but she couldn't deny how much Daniel had come to mean to her. He was kind, thoughtful, and patient, never pushing her to move faster than she was ready. For the first time in years, Nora felt like she was truly living, not just going through the motions. Robert, meanwhile, was still trying to find his way. He had started attending a support group for people dealing with guilt and regret, and though it was difficult, he found some solace in sharing his story. He continued to write letters to Nora, though he had stopped expecting a response. In one letter, he shared how much he admired her strength. "You've always been the strong one, Nora," he wrote. "I see that now more than ever. I hope you know how much I respect you, even if I don't deserve your forgiveness." Nora read the letter with a heavy heart, tucking it away with the others. She wasn't ready to respond, but she couldn't deny that his words stirred something in her. Forgiveness still felt like a distant possibility, but she no longer felt the sharp sting of anger when she thought of him. Claire's crafting workshop at the bookstore was a success, drawing a small but enthusiastic crowd. Nora watched as Claire interacted with the participants, her face lighting up with joy. It was clear that she had found her passion, and Nora felt a sense of pride in having played a small part in that. After the workshop, Claire pulled Nora aside. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "for giving me a chance, for not hating me." Nora smiled faintly. "We've both been through enough," she said. "I'm glad we could do something positive together." Claire nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "Me too," she said softly. As the months passed, Nora's life continued to evolve. Her relationship with Daniel grew deeper, though they took things slowly, both cautious after their own past heartbreaks. The bookstore flourished, becoming a beloved part of the community. Emily and Jack were thriving, and Nora felt a deep sense of gratitude for the life she had built. One evening, as she stood in the bookstore, surrounded by the stories of others, she realized how far she had come. The pain of Robert's betrayal was still there, but it no longer defined her. She had faced so much, but she had also found strength she never knew she had. The final chapter of Nora's story was one of quiet triumph. She had rebuilt her life from the ashes, finding joy and purpose in the process. As she looked out at the bustling street, she knew that whatever came next, she was ready. The past had shaped her, but it didn't define her. She was Nora, and her story was just beginning. And as she closed the bookstore for the night, she felt a sense of peace, knowing that she had not only survived but thrived. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, that uncertainty felt like a gift. Nora smiled to herself as she turned off the lights, ready to face whatever came next.